My name is Megan, and if you ask my dad, I was always the odd one out. I was the girl with scraped knees, hand-me-down jeans, and a laugh that cracked too loudly in church. I wasn't what he expected from a daughter, not when he had my brother to compare me to. Jake, my older brother, was the golden child. Straight-A student, varsity athlete. Then later, a polished surgeon with a perfect wife and a home out of a catalog. Me? I was the tomboy who climbed trees, talked too much at the dinner table, and couldn't for the life of me walk in heels without looking like I was herding cattle. Dad didn't hide his feelings. He'd say things like, "God gave me a son to be proud of, and a daughter to keep me humble." Every time he looked at me, it was like he was searching for some trace of grace he hoped I'd grow into. It never came. Not in my clothes, not in my posture, and certainly not in the way I answered back when I felt cornered. Family gatherings were the worst. My aunts would praise Jake's latest promotion, while Dad would chuckle and point at me with a beer in hand, saying, "This one? She'll probably end up managing a gas station if she ever figures out how to fill out an application." It always got a laugh. But not from me. I used to stand in front of the mirror and practice smiling in ways I thought looked softer, more feminine. I even tried curling my hair once, burned my forehead and gave up. Looking back, I think I just wanted him to see me. Really see me. Not as some failed version of a daughter, but as a person trying to be enough. I got used to disappearing in rooms where my family gathered. They talked around me, not to me. When I brought home a certificate for perfect attendance, Dad said, "Well, at least you're consistently average." That stuck with me longer than it should have. Some words do that. They lodge deep and echo when you least expect them. I learned early on to wear armor made of indifference, or at least pretend I didn't care. I laughed when he made fun of my walk. I rolled my eyes when he called me the fixer, upper kid. I let it slide when he introduced me to his coworkers as the one who hasn't figured life out yet. But I felt every word, every time. Truth is, I stopped expecting him to be proud a long time ago. I stopped needing it. Or at least, I told myself I did. I found other places to grow, other paths to walk. But a part of me still remembered every look, every joke, every silent comparison. And maybe, just maybe, I carried all that weight right into the uniform I chose to wear later. I joined the Army the summer I turned 19. There wasn't some grand plan behind it. I just wanted out. Out of the house, out of the jokes, out of being the shadow standing next to my brother's spotlight. The recruiter at the strip mall told me the Army could make anyone into something. I figured that meant maybe it could make me into someone my dad couldn't laugh at. Basic training hit me harder than I expected. But for the first time in my life, being tough wasn't a flaw. It was a skill. The same stubborn streak my dad used to mock became the thing that kept me standing when others wanted to quit. I learned how to keep my bunk tight, my voice steady, and my fear tucked away where no one could reach it. I didn't write home much. When I did, the letters were short. "Doing fine," I'd say, "working hard." My dad never wrote back, and Mom's notes always sounded nervous. Like she didn't know what she was allowed to say. I could feel the distance stretching between us, mile by mile, until it felt safer not to reach out at all. The Army gave me what my family never did. Structure. Clarity. A way to measure my worth that didn't depend on someone else's approval. I got promoted faster than I expected. Turns out I was good at taking orders and even better at leading from the front. Discipline made sense to me. It was clean and fair. If you worked, you earned. If you led, you protected. Simple math that my childhood never offered. Deployments came next. Iraq first, then Afghanistan. I learned what exhaustion really meant. I learned that fear could live in your bones and still not own you. I learned to read faces under night vision light, to hear danger in the smallest silence. I wasn't anyone's embarrassment there. I was Sergeant West, the one who kept her team alive. The medals started to stack up, but I didn't tell anyone back home. What would be the point? My dad wouldn't have believed it. Or worse, he'd have turned it into another joke. "Did they give you a medal for finally following directions?" he'd say. I could hear the line before it even left his mouth, so I kept quiet. After my second tour, they offered me the first sergeant spot for a unit. I said yes without thinking twice. Leading felt natural. I didn't need to be liked, just trusted. The men and women under me gave that trust freely because I earned it. We weren't family, but we had something better. We had respect. Whenever I came home on leave, I left the uniform in the bag. I wore jeans and long sleeves. Dad would ask if I was still doing that government gig, and I'd just nod. He never pushed for details, and I never volunteered them. Silence became our language. It was easier that way. There were moments, though, when I wished he'd ask, just once. Ask what it felt like to land in a war zone, or how I kept my people calm when everything around us was burning. But the question never came. He didn't want to know. Or maybe he didn't think I had much to say. Some nights, sitting in my barracks after lights out, I'd think about that house back in Georgia. The smell of motor oil from his workshop, the sound of the game on TV, and the laughter that always came at my expense. It used to make me angry. Then one day, I realized anger was just another way of holding on. So I set it down. I built a life out of silence and steel. Promotions came. More medals. More men and women are calling me Sergeant Major with respect in their eyes. But the truth is, every step forward was shadowed by the same voice from my past. No matter how far I went, part of me still stood in that kitchen, hearing my dad say I'd never amount to much. So I let him keep believing it. It was easier to let him stay wrong than try to make him right. I'd stopped chasing his approval years ago, but I hadn't realized yet that some truths have a way of finding their stage. And mine was still waiting. I hadn't worn a dress in years, but for Ethan's wedding, I made an exception. He was my favorite nephew, always had been. And something about the way he'd invited me personally, with warmth, made me feel like showing up mattered. I stood in front of the mirror that morning longer than I care to admit, adjusting the navy blue fabric, brushing back my hair, wondering if I looked decent or just like a soldier trying to play dress-up. The ceremony was beautiful. Outdoor setting, soft string music, everything, picture perfect. I kept to the side during photos, smiled when spoken to, and did my best to blend into the celebration. I'd gotten good at that over the years, but I'll admit, deep down, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, this time my dad would see me differently. Not as a disappointment, just as a daughter. That hope lasted until the cocktail hour. I was standing by the bar when he spotted me across the lawn. He walked over, half laughing, glass of wine in hand, and said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Well, would you look at that? She finally looks like a woman, from the back at least." The laughter from a few cousins stung worse than the words. I smiled. Of course I did. That's what you do when you've been trained to deflect humiliation. I laughed along, nodded, even shrugged like I didn't care. But inside, something sharp twisted. Not because it was the first time he'd said something like that, but because I'd actually dared to hope this time would be different. I could feel the heat in my chest, the rush of blood behind my ears, but I stayed calm. Years of leadership taught me that silence can be stronger than any comeback. Still, I had to grip my wine glass tighter than I should have. It was either that or throw it, and I wasn't about to become a story told at the next reunion. He wandered off like he'd just delivered a punchline, clapping Jake on the back as he went. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word. That's the thing about certain families. Once you've been cast as the joke, the room will always play along. I found a quiet spot by the edge of the reception tent and sat down, smoothing my dress like it mattered. I thought about walking out, just getting in my car, driving back to the base, and pretending the whole thing never happened. But then I looked over at Ethan. He was laughing with his bride, beaming, happy. He'd asked me to be there. He wanted me there. That mattered more than anything my father could take away. So I stayed, not for my dad, for Ethan, for the few people who saw me without the filter of old family stories. Still, part of me wondered if my silence made me complicit, if letting him get away with it again meant I'd never really stop being the punchline. But something in my gut told me to wait. The night wasn't over, and neither was my story. Dinner was just being served when it happened. I was sitting at table 7, minding my own, trying not to replay my father's comment over and over in my head. The clink of silverware and low hum of conversation filled the tent. But suddenly, it all stopped. One of the groomsmen stood up. He looked taller somehow, posture straighter than before. I recognized him instantly, though it had been years. His name was Ramirez. He stepped out from behind the head table, walked around slowly, and came to a stop in front of me. The entire room turned to watch. I didn't move. I wasn't sure I could. Ramirez brought his heels together with sharp precision, raised his hand, and gave me a full, formal military salute. Gasps echoed through the tent. A fork clattered to the ground. My dad, mid-sip of red wine, choked and coughed, sending a spray across the linen-covered table. He looked confused. He knew enough about the military to know that you don't typically salute like that at a wedding, and he definitely didn't recognize my rank. Ramirez lowered his hand, looked straight at my father, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sir, my name is Captain Ramirez. This woman you've been mocking, she's Sergeant Major Megan West, and she was my senior NCO in Kandahar." There was a beat of silence that felt like it could crack glass. My father stared at me, mouth parted, blinking. He knew what a captain was, and he just saw that captains salute someone he thought was a failure. Then 2 more groomsmen stood up, both young lieutenants. One by one they approached, saluted me, and stood behind Ramirez. "We didn't come to crash the wedding," Ramirez continued. "We came because this day matters. And so does she. Sergeant Major West saved my life and the lives of a dozen others. She's a decorated war hero. You can laugh at her clothes or call her names, but you will not ignore what she's done. Not tonight." The room erupted into applause. Not the polite kind, the kind that shakes you, the kind that feels earned. I didn't cry. Not there. But my hands trembled in my lap. As I nodded to each of them, my body sat still, but my heart was sprinting. I glanced at Ethan. He looked stunned, eyes wide, then slowly stood and clapped with the rest. Then he turned to me and mouthed, "Why didn't you tell me?" I just smiled. There was no bitterness left, just a quiet kind of pride I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. My dad didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. That look of disbelief, the way his shoulders sank just a little. He finally saw me, not as the disappointment, not as the joke, but as someone the world respected. That moment wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about truth, finally finding its way to the surface. For the first time, I didn't feel small in that man's presence. I felt seen, and I wasn't alone. People didn't sit down right away. The applause rolled on, not out of politeness, but out of something real. You could feel it in the way folks looked at me, like they were seeing someone entirely new, even though I hadn't moved an inch. A few people wiped their eyes. Some walked over just to shake my hand, but I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap, watching the room shift in slow motion. There was a weight lifting off my chest that I didn't even know I'd been carrying for years. My father didn't clap. He didn't stand either, but he didn't leave. And that, coming from him, meant more than if he'd stood on the table and shouted my rank for all to hear. He stayed rooted in place, staring at me with something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't pride. Not exactly. It was more like awareness. Like he'd just realized the person in front of him had lived a life far beyond his assumptions. He didn't touch his wine again. He didn't joke, didn't fidget, didn't smirk. just silence. But for the first time, that silence didn't sting. It didn't feel like dismissal. It felt like a presence. And that made all the difference. When the room finally settled and people went back to their meals, I stayed quiet. I didn't make a speech, didn't correct anything or gloat. I didn't need to. Sometimes, being seen without explanation is the loudest kind of victory. Later that night, while the dance floor buzzed and the DJ played something soft from the 70s, I caught my dad looking at me again, not with that familiar trace of judgment, but with something gentler. He gave a small nod, nothing more. It was the smallest gesture in the world. But coming from him, it was monumental. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a full apology. But it was a crack in the wall that had stood between us for decades. And that was enough, for now. A few weeks after the wedding, a letter showed up at my door. Not an email, not a text. An actual letter, folded neatly inside a plain white envelope with my name written in shaky handwriting. I knew by heart. It was from my dad, just one sheet of paper. No long explanations, no emotional outpouring. Just 10 words, in uneven pen strokes. I was wrong. You deserved better. I'm sorry, Dad. That was it. I sat with it for a long time. Read it twice, folded it back up, and placed it in the kitchen drawer next to some old receipts and a spare key. I didn't cry. I didn't call him. I didn't feel the rush of validation I once thought I'd crave if those words ever came. Because by then, I already knew who I was. I had known for a while. I had built something stronger than pride, stronger than hurt. I had built a life on my own terms, one that didn't depend on whether or not my father ever saw it. Still, I won't lie. His words mattered. Not because I needed them, but because he chose to write them. And maybe, for the first time, he saw past the version of me he had created in his mind. People chase approval their whole lives. I did too, once. But it turns out, peace doesn't come from being seen the way you want. It comes from knowing your worth when no one's watching, and holding on to it like armor. I haven't responded to his letter. Not yet. Maybe I will someday. Or maybe that one quiet moment at the wedding, when he finally stopped talking, was enough for both of us. You don't have to wait for someone to recognize your worth. You don't have to prove anything to the people who never bothered to look beyond their assumptions. The truth is, the world has a way of catching up slowly, awkwardly, but eventually. So live your life with purpose. Build your strength in silence. And when they finally see you, when they finally understand what you've become, you won't need their applause. You'll already be standing in it. Let them underestimate you. Let them laugh, dismiss, and look away. Just keep building, keep becoming. And when the moment comes, you'll be ready. Has anyone ever underestimated you until it was too late? Tell me below. I'd love to hear your story.